Thank you so much, Anselm. And thank you all for coming this evening. And I look forward to the respondents. You know, it's really a privilege and a pleasure to be at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, one of the great universities in the world. And its founding actually is very much connected to my own lineage. So I just wanted to mention that before we go into our talk. Its founding in 49 by some very distinguished Confucian scholars, Qian Mu and Tang Zheni. And Qian Mu, as you know, was president from 49 to 65, a long time. And the interesting thing is there was also help for Qian Mu at that time from the Yale China Association in setting up the New Asia College as part of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And the admiration I have for these early Confucians is almost boundless. But I wanted to say also that Yale sent graduates to teach English and be part of the faculty early on under Qian Mu. And Qian Mu got an honorary degree from Yale. So I feel this very special connection, you see, to the founding, especially of the Asian College, the New Asian College. And also my professor, the lineage goes on. I had a wonderful professor at Columbia University, Theodore de Barry, who came to China in 1948 to study Confucianism, and he did the third Qian Mu lecture here. And two of my other teachers did as well. Winsett Chan came to Columbia every Friday for Neo-Confucian seminar, and he did one of the Qian Mu lectures. And Dui Ming, who is a very distinguished New Confucian, as you know, also did one of the Qian Mu lectures. So I feel this gratitude to be here. I feel this amazing lineage from my teachers, and also the incredible tenacity, dedication of these early Chinese Confucian scholars coming to Hong Kong and Taiwan, Mo Zedong, and keeping alive one of the great traditions in the world. So in that context, we are going to speak tonight, partly of our teachers, both Teilhard and Thomas Berry, and their influence perhaps, not directly, but indirectly, on this extraordinary encyclical.
Mary Evelyn has lit the incense for the ancestors, and it's really wonderful to feel that presence and to be with you and to say a very heartfelt thanks for being here and for allowing us to come from the States at a time that's very troubling for us in the States, especially because the language that's often used now to talk about the relationship of our two countries is fraught with these challenges. And we wanted to say, quite frankly, our presence here is really to talk about maintaining an old friendship. We have a long-standing friendship between the US and China, and there's so many of us in the States who really stand with that friendship. And that means a great deal to us, and that motivates us. And also the opportunity to talk about our teachers in the context of Laudato Si is a way of bringing that thanks to our teaching ancestors also. And so let me give the floor back to Mary Evelyn.
Okay, good. That's good. Thank you. Thanks very much. So we're going to be speaking about this integral ecology of Teilhard de Chardin and Thomas Berry. So Laudato Si is bringing together, as you know, science and religion, joining ecology and ethics. And this is an extremely important document because almost nowhere is this brought together so effectively. Now, Einstein, as we know, said science without religion is lame, but religion without science is blind. We know this, and we're still in a period where these are very separate, unfortunately. The environmental crisis, as many of us see it, is a spiritual and an ethical crisis, not only scientific or even technological. Because as our dean, in bringing us to Yale more than 20 years ago now, the very distinguished environmentalist Gus Speth. He said, we have the science and policy and law and economics and technology to make this transition, but towards a viable future. But what is missing? This is a person who founded World Resources Institute, the National Resources Defense Council, etc. So what is missing? We need the spiritual energies and the ethical directions to overcome despair and disempowerment, especially of youth. This despair is very widespread, I think, not only in the West, but in China. And young people's future is at stake. So this notion of spiritual, not religious, that there's a broad search for meaning and purpose and belonging despite the eco-anxiety that pervades our societies. So I'm inviting this larger sensibility, not just a narrow religious sensibility, but a tremendous eco-spiritual sensibility. How to live life with connection to others, to nature, and to the universe. All our students are thinking about this in some way. Now, the stress of the climate emergency, and the US takes a lot of responsibility for this, but tremendous upheaval, floods, fires, droughts. The climate refugees, a minimal number is 90 million around the planet. And people living in these refugee camps, the estimate is for 17 years. This is a major, major worldwide crisis and heartbreaking in every possible way. Pollution is the other big issue in the United Nations Environment Program. These are sacred rivers, as you know, in India, and polluted beyond measure. The Yamuna, the Ganges, we've done conferences there, et cetera. But pollution is, again, worldwide. Our rivers in the US and North America are polluted. We're also, so we have climate change, we've got pollution, but biodiversity loss is the third large problem that UNEP, United Nations, recognizes. So we are in this extinction period. We had an extraordinary afternoon yesterday with Josephine Wu at the Kodori Garden and Farm. And you could see their efforts to preserve flora and fauna and have nature education. Very, very impressive. We thank you for that. So integral ecologists are more and more important, bringing together this unity of people and planet. Teilhard had a sense of our cosmic home, very similar to Tian in Chinese thought, that the heaven, the universe is our cosmic home. Barry had a strong sense of earth community. So we've got the heaven, we've got the earth, and Pope Francis has the human, both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor coming together. So the call for integral ecology, you can say on the one hand, is an eco-spirituality of awe, of wonder and beauty of creation. And this is throughout the encyclical, but also eco-justice, the action, this cry of the earth, cry of the poor that came from Leonardo Boff, one of the liberation theologians in Brazil, and in a book he did in our series at Orbis called Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor. And Thomas Berry said to Leonardo, you cannot save people without a healthy ecosystem. That shifted a lot of the anthropocentrism of the Christian concern. So eco-justice is exceedingly important.
If we consider this first integral ecologist, then Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit whose dates give some indication of a broad overview, 1881 to 1900. He has early formative years in the 19th century. And I think that's very important to think about Teilhard's thought as it develops. But I would call Teilhard a 20th century personality. His thought really matures in the 20th century. His contributions then can also be summarized quickly by his commitment as a Jesuit to religious life and his endeavors as a scientist, trained in geology and then moved into paleontology. His life has a number of dynamics, and of course, any life, it's too long to summarize, but he comes from the south of France, and from his mother especially, a very strong religious influence, which I find helpful in my own memory to think of this image of the Sacred Heart. And in terms of the religiosity of the times, the Sacred Heart of Jesus was an all-encompassing and centering symbol. Became very important to Teilhard. He would take that kind of image and other images from his religious background into this sense of cosmic home or divine milieu, the heart of the cosmos, to use that phrase. From his father in Haoran, he was introduced to natural science, the chemical, geological, the formation of the province itself. Teilhard joins the Jesuit order and moves through that to training, and eventually he is in England, where he undergoes a profound experience with the concept of evolution. And he is oriented toward fossil collecting, and in England, this really takes shape when he reads the work of Henri Bergson. So the sense of someone who is shaped in the 19th century by ideas of a deep religiosity in his Catholic background, and then running up against the concerns of the modernist controversy, the analytical turn towards intellectual knowledge. So Teilhard returns to France. He is a stretcher bearer in World War I. His experiences brought him to a profound questioning of meaning in this suffering of the war, and he sees it in this evolutionary perspective, in deepening his understanding of deep time. Some of his most profound writings are in these early years. He continues his studies in geology, his fascination with fossils and land formation, and they lead him to his early writings then when he completes his doctorate in the early 20s. His writings on religion and evolution then cause controversy within especially the Catholic Church and its hierarchy, and also the Jesuit order then has to respond to one of its members in this challenge. And Teilhard receives an invitation in 1923 to go to China and to join with Émile Lecent, another Jesuit, very committed to fossil gathering. He accepts that invitation. He returns in 26. The situation is still not tenable for him, and he is then exiled, and he goes to China then. On and off, he will be in China until after World War II, into the late 40s. So Teilhard will return a few times, but many family members are lost. He lives for more than 20 years, traveling across Asia, doing studies, involved in the discovery of Peking Man-Here Chokutian in 27. So Teilhard's religious and spiritual writings, they reflect this very deep and a struggle and an effort to articulate this spiritual religious journey with the understanding of evolution. So he will begin to write during World War I as a stretcher bearer these early glimpses of a hymn of the universe. Again, feel the sensual quality of the person. He is not speaking simply in scholastic language, which is available to him in his training, but he's groping towards some language which captures the deep experience that he's having of the cosmos. As a priest then, and saying the sacrifice of the Mass, he sees at a moment in the Gobi deserts in north of Beijing, he experiences the moment when he says the Mass without bread and wine, and he sees then the world as itself the medium with which he can enter into that communion relationship, and writes the Mass on the world. Again, a continuation of early writings. His cosmic home, or the sense of the human as embedded in the cosmos, this language of the divine milieu, this setting. I study with native peoples, and the place-based knowledge of native peoples is such a cardinal characteristic of their understanding. Can you sense it in Teilhard also? He has the place, the universe itself, as a milieu, a setting in which the human moves and finds our being. And it's a divine, it's a sacred universe. and finally his major work, The Human Phenomenon. Teilhard moves through his life, returns to France after the war. His exile continues. He dies then in New York on Easter 1955. He has lived in New York then after his exile, and his spiritual ideas were still considered too radical. He found ready employment, though, at the Veteran Gren Foundation and also at the American Museum of Natural History. Very active interaction with the science community there. Teilhard's deep reverence for life is a recognition that humans come out of vibrant life systems in which they are deeply related to these systems. They're coursing through our bodies. We, in turn, are coursing through these systems. And it brought Teilhard to a concern to respond to the existential crisis between the war periods and his emphasis upon recovering a zest for life. So the energies that inspire human action. For Teilhard then, he would talk about the divine. God must be as vast as the universe and as warm as a human heart and incomparably more besides. This is all we can say. So Teilhard's sense of a God beyond name and form, and yet communicated in the energies of the earth. In each one of us, he would say, through matter, the whole history of the world is reflected. This constellation of ideas then in Teilhard, overly quick, but for Teilhard, spirit and matter are not two separate concepts or terms or forces, but rather two dimensions of one activity. So unity that can be distinguished as spirit and matter, spirit drawing matter forward into the future. Teilhard is very future-oriented thinker. His concern, again, then for energy, the sense of a human zest and the recovery of human energies in relationship to the earth and the larger evolving universe. He has a deep respect and reverence for matter. The entropy, the gravitational collapse of matter or the disintegration of matter he's very committed to this dynamic rather than simply being a transcendent spirit-oriented thinker. Spirit and matter are very dynamic activity. His early criticism from the church and from his order, more from the church than from his order, regarding Genesis and the Garden of Eden, very powerful concepts in the early biblical materials. Teilhard would adapt his ideas and talk about cosmogenesis. In other words, when is the beginning of the universe? When did the genesis of the universe take place? Teilhard did have a very clear sense of an expanding universe, but he was more committed to cosmogenesis. The universe is beginning at this very moment. So he was not simply past-oriented, but rather a presence moving into the future. Omega point, many people are familiar with Teilhard's neologism or his coining of this idea using the Greek term for the last letter in the alphabet. And they say, well, Teilhard's oriented towards the future when spirit will merge back with the divine and gravity, then matter will disintegrate. But actually, omega is a concept Teilhard uses from the very beginning. Omega point is at the primal flaring forth. Omega point is at the heart of cosmogenesis, moving towards this final also. But it's a more complex idea than simply final. And this sense then of zest for life, as I've mentioned. We held a celebration of Teilhard's death, it's the 50th anniversary in 2005. Over 1,500 people came to the United Nations for presentations that we gave there, over 200 from France alone, and it was a rather extraordinary moment for the New York setting because both Fordham, Rose Hill and downtown Fordham participated, many other institutions in New York participated in this celebration.
So, Thomas Berry, and Thomas preceded us as director, president of the American Teilhard Association, which we directed for 40 years. But he was deeply inspired by Teilhard de Chardin. These are some of his books: The Dream of the Earth, Evening Thoughts, Sacred Universe, and Great Work. And these are all going to be eventually in Chinese. Several of them are already from Sun Yat-sen University. And Thomas influenced many, many people. There were 1,000 people at his memorial. His brief biography is that he came to China in 1948, also with my professor, William Theodore de Barry, as I mentioned, and they had to leave in 1948 as Mao came into Beijing. But this interest in China was very old. He directed the History of Religions program at Fordham, and that's where we met. I wrote to him when I was in Japan teaching for his book on Buddhism. And he was one of the few in that period, along with Ted de Barry, who really knew Asian religions. He had a library of 10,000 books. He had them in the languages. He studied Chinese language and so on. So as I mentioned, he was president of the American Teilhard Association. He had this Riverdale Center of Religious Research. And for all these years, from 70 to 95, each Saturday during the school year, once a month, first Saturday, we would have these Teilhard meetings. It created a tremendous sense of community as he was developing some of his most creative ideas. So Thomas had this feeling about eco-spirituality. He would say, at its core, even our spirituality is earth-derived. The human and the earth are totally implicated in one another. Now, that's a profound idea, and his book, Sacred Universe, speaks about that. That's from Columbia Press, a very secular press. That they would take that for a title is quite unusual. But this is one of his original ideas. Again, you can see how connected it is to Teilhard, where spirit and matter are evolving together. So the spirituality of the earth, he would say, if there's no spirituality in the earth, then there's no spirituality in ourselves. It doesn't come from something in the sky or totally transcendent or whatever. The spiritual dynamics of the universe, and this is what Chinese thought understands: organic, holistic changing of the universe itself, the I Ching, from the very beginning, the Book of Changes and so on. So there's a great compatibility with both these thinkers and Chinese thought. So the spiritual presence in all of life, he would say, we can no longer hear the voice of the rivers, the mountains, or the sea. The trees and meadows are no longer intimate modes of spirit presence. The world about us has become an it rather than a thou. As we know, this is very profound in indigenous traditions, which John studies for many, many years. But that sensibility, which I think is coming back more and more, is definitely in the US, this feeling for a living earth community. And we're doing a website on this. There's hundreds of books now on this sensibility of what is living and how can we meditate and feel these sensibilities. So ecology, living systems, not just something to study objectively, but he says our studies in what we call ecology must lead to such intimacy with our natural surroundings. Only intimacy can save us from our present commitment to a plundering industrial economy. We can say a capitalist economy as well. So this intimacy, this sense of a thou. Some of his key ideas is that we need a new story. He wrote, everyone's saying now in the West, we need new stories and so on, and I'm sure that's familiar here. But he had this notion, like Teilhard, to tell the evolutionary story that Teilhard told in a scientific way and a spiritual way. But Thomas said we have to bring it out even further as story so that people will understand. We dwell in this sacred universe, this divine milieu, this hymn of the universe, as Teilhard would say, and we live in an earth community. He actually created that idea of earth community, and he was one of the first in the 80s, mid-80s, to use the term integral ecology, actually. So this is one of his most famous lines, that Earth is a communion, actually the whole universe, he would say, is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects, this objectification of the world. and that the great work is creating a flourishing future. So how do we, as Confucians would say, how are we part of universe, earth, and human? Tian Ren Hu Yi. This is the same thing that Thomas was saying, that we can create a great work by being co-creators with heaven and earth. So this cosmic and eco-spirituality means an appreciation for the sacred universe out of which earth and life evolved, and to which we all belong. From the great flaring forth, the origin of the universe, that great mysterious moment, to the emergence of galaxies and stars, and over billions of years, this evolution taking place, to the emergence of solar systems, and especially our own solar system, the Milky Way. This is taken in Pennsylvania with a
galaxy.
Yeah, where the Milky Way galaxy, thank you. It was visible to one of our friends who took this beautiful picture. So this evokes in us reverence and respect and responsibility.
This sense of reverence, valuing the complexity of Earth and the profound interdependence of all life systems, reverence has such strong religious connotations that still, I feel, in the Western traditions, you get that concern about worship of the earth, and paganism emerges in this regard. And I think part of what Teilhard and Thomas Berry, in their sense of integral ecology, they are exploring new ways of understanding reverence to bring forward a feeling that when we see the dawn and it calls out of us this reverence, it is a reflection of ourselves in the universe, understanding the universe calling us. The sunset themselves, the beautiful colors of awe and wonder that are evoked in us by these moments of reverence in our encounter with Earth systems.
So this brings us immediately to respecting, from reverence to respect, a realization that all life is connected and emerged here on Earth after billions of years of evolution. Nowhere else in our solar system that we know so far. But this is a profound paradigm shift. Our grandparents didn't know that this was a 14 billion year universe. It's hard to understand what this means. But this expands everything of our consciousness and conscience. It's a profound shift for humans. Here we have this 1968 picture that changed everything. You don't remember it, but I do, namely the young people here. And that shift, first time we could see this blue-green planet from space, and surrounded by water, by air, all of the biological community of life, a biosphere, a living planet with magnificent mountains, especially here in Asia, the Himalayas and so on. And that drawing reverence from all the traditions, especially Buddhism and mountain pilgrimage.
You can sense the responsibility then for the future of life in these thinkers. They call us to realize that we are responsible for the care and continuity of the Earth community, and that this care is not simply a burden on our shoulders, but like forest bathing, it's constantly giving to us the sense of a presence that we see in the mountains and the rivers, and we participate in the flow of reality around us. This responsibility merges us to the sea, our origin moment from out of these profound salty waters, and the soaring character of birds in flight that give us our own predatory manners, a direction, a sense of a new transcendence. For the human family, we begin to realize our relatedness is not simply anthropocentric, but anthropocosmic. We are part of a larger, evolving universe, and this involves all humans as well as all generations. And as we feel the call of the earth, of the universe itself, we feel the call of the next generation. So one of the people I study with, Haudenosaunee people, they look down at the earth and they say, can you see the faces of the young ones who are coming up out of the earth? So a people who image the next generations, speaking to them as they are coming out of the earth. I think these two thinkers, they had their own understanding of how the cosmos is bringing us face to face with our ethical concerns.
And this is why we made a film and wrote a book and so on in a multimedia project that through Anselm and the community here, happy to share that. So film, we made it in Samos, in the island of Greece, to illustrate one of the early rises of civilization, concentric circles going out. This book, both the film and book are in Chinese, the podcasts of interviews with 10 scientists and 10 environmentalists. There's 3 online courses that are also in Chinese and a website and a newsletter. This was telling the new story. And we did it with a scientist, Brian Swim, but it's indebted to Teilhard's evolutionary perspective and the new story of Barry, that human phenomenon book, his most important book that John had listed there, was the first telling of evolution. And Barry called forth and wrote with Brian Swim the first book on this, which was called Universe Story. So this is the first film on it. And the book is in 6 languages and so on. It has been very well received here in China because of the cosmology, because of this understanding of how we belong to the larger universe. Now we're making a shift, having said all of this about these great thinkers. Teilhard is mentioned in the Encyclical only in a footnote, 83. But I also wanted to note that the Earth Charter is mentioned in a footnote as well. And this is probably the most important document of interdependence. We don't need just independence in our Western sense. We need community. And the Earth Charter came out of the Rio conference. It took 10 years to write. I was part of the drafting committee. But here's this quote. The Earth Charter asked us to leave behind a period of self-destruction and make a new start, but we have not as yet developed a universal awareness needed to achieve this. So the Earth Charter had a cosmological sense. It says at the beginning, we're part of a vast evolving universe. Earth, our home, is alive with a myriad community of life, which is the indigenous peoples. And then it's these 3 elements of ecology, justice, and peace, beginning with the integral and the integrity of creation, okay? And then justice and peace have to fit into that. So just briefly to summarize this remarkable document, it was a broad invitation to Catholics around the world, to Christians, to Orthodox and Protestant. He worked very closely with the Greek Orthodox Patriarch Bartholomew, who was at the Vatican when it was released. It was actually also to people of all religions, to spiritual people, to people seekers. The response of the world's religions, and it's on our website, the Forum on Religion and Ecology, very positive, very affirming. They wrote their own statements supporting it. And wanting to work with the Laudato Si movement, many youth are working to support this movement, not just a document. Response from environmentalists has been very, very strong. Scientists and ecologists. Bill McKibben, one of our most famous environmentalists, says this is the most important document of the 21st century. That's incredible, because he has written so many books on the environment. And very briefly, I'll just highlight some of the chapters. This document begins with science. Now, in China, we know 95% of the people understand that climate change is real and an existential threat. Nowhere in the world is that as well understood, which is why we are very keen to work on the ecological dimensions of these issues in China. The second chapter is this gospel of creation, this eco-spirituality that we've been talking about. So he takes a step back from science and brings us into the mystery of the universe, to awe, the harmony of creation, and the interdependence of all life. Very beautifully written too. And then he takes a step back again. So you've got the integrity of creation back to the human roots of the ecological crisis, the instrumental use of nature, consumerism and materialism, market-based solutions as not sufficient. We have to see this as a profound critique of capitalism. We really need to understand what is happening. Capitalism is driving us over the brink. And that's what many environmentalists are saying in the West. So integral ecology is this eco-justice, but this oneness of interdependence. So ecology, economics, equity, and ethics for action. It's tremendous integration. Solidarity with the poor, with refugees. The Pope has a very strong identification. And intergenerational justice. We like to say to our students, we're giving an intergenerational handshake for the future of our planet. So, living the story, to conclude here.
This presentation is obviously trying to raise the question of what orients us, and this sense of living the story then we find in all cultural traditions, something that orients the cultural and people to a larger cosmos. It grounds people in Earth's living systems. It nurtures us with water, air, food, and transforms us with energy for change, this zest for life, the gusto. Reciprocity with nature, Thomas Berry would say, it is in this renewed sense of reciprocity with nature, in all of its complexity and remarkable beauty, that can help provide the psychic and spiritual energies necessary for the work ahead. This eco-spirituality and eco-justice as integral ecology then inspires awe and action in terms of education in schools, colleges, and seminaries, and leadership now in community empowerment and for resilience and inspiration, and the power of art, the performative character of art to embody eco-spirituality. So we sense this enduring influence of Teilhard and Thomas Berry in integral ecology, an understanding of how human flows out of universe processes, in ecological spirituality, a deep meaning in our encounter with the earth systems, education, earth as primary educator, and finally, ecological conversion, experiencing those transformative moments in our life as a larger perspective that brings us into the community of subjectivities, the community of voices on the earth.
So thank you very much, and we look forward to our respondents and discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, it's my honor to be invited to give a response here. When Dr. Lam asked, can you nominate any scholar who can give a Confucian response to today's lecture, I say I should nominate myself. Yeah, because number one, I start publishing on how what Christian ecological theology may learn from Confucianism more than 20 years ago. And from time to time, I make reference to the book co-edited by John and Mary concerning Confucianism and ecology. And last year, I was invited to give a paper in Singapore to give a response to Laudato Si, just before the Pope's visit to Asia. So I think I can do some academic recycling. Yeah, that is our ecological practice. Okay. Why Confucian response? Because I think that in the Western world, there are some scholars, they are thinking about what Western civilization or Christianity may learn from the Eastern religions. Yeah, usually they think about Hinduism, Taoism, and Buddhism. Usually they overlook Confucianism, but I think Confucianism can make some distinctive contribution or perspective to the ecological issues. That's why I usually work on Confucianism instead of Buddhism or Taoism or Hinduism. Okay, now maybe start with Chardin. There's a comment made by Joseph Needham, who is the famous scholar about Chinese science and civilization, and actually he is the chairman of the Chardin Society in Europe. Yeah, once he commented on a book that, wow, Chardin made a sharp contrast between Eastern and Western religions and was critical towards Eastern religions, but he said that perhaps Chardin's knowledge of Chinese language and culture was not that good. If he understands better Taoism and Confucianism, maybe he find that both of them are well-affirming instead of well-renouncing. Yeah, okay, that is his comment. I searched the biography of Chardin and find that actually 98 years ago, around this time, he visited Hong Kong as a stopover to mainland China, to Beijing particularly. So I think, well, what will be my response in case Chardin now is in the audience, what I should say to him, yeah? And I think that I will say the following. Now, basically, this is my conclusion. I will say the conclusion first, yeah, in case I don't have the time to finish my PPT. Yeah. Largely, I will say very positively that Confucianism will say amen, yeah, to most of the points raised by John and Mary concerning the insights from the Chardin, Barry, and Pope Francis regarding ecological concern. Because Confucianism agrees to the notion of cosmic home or earth community very well. And also it will support the idea about ecological spirituality of our, as well as the concern for eco-justice, respecting all lives, etc., etc. And Confucianism also advocates an integral ecology comparable to Laudato Si. I will go into explain it a little bit later. And Confucianism will say, yeah, don't worry too much. Eco-anxiety, yeah, we may better to say no anxiety, trust the great parent, and better to act as assistant to heaven and earth. Okay, this is basically my points, yeah. My elaboration is that Confucianism, sometimes because of the English term, yeah, people will think that, oh, Confucianism is about what Confucius himself said and his follower said. But actually, in Chinese, it's Rujia. Yeah, basically, Confucius assumed that he is following a tradition rather than an innovator of a new tradition. Yeah, and he refers to the practice of the ancient sage kings. And some of the ancient sage kings practice a very interesting practice that, for example, the Emperor Tang, well, we call it Wang Kai Yi Mian. Yeah, when he tried to do the hunting, yeah, he just cast net for one direction and leave open the other three. Yeah, so that they have the chance to escape. And also, if you look into the monarchies, he also talked to the emperor or king Liang Hui Huang. Yeah, oh, if you do not interfere with the busy seasons in the field, then there will be more grain than people can eat, etc., etc. He has a very clear sense of sustainable development. If you want your kingdom grow properly, attract people to strengthen your kingdom, you should practice these sustainable development practices, for example. So it's a very ancient tradition, yeah. So bring your access to the forest only at a good time, yeah, not every time, yeah, something like that. Okay, and then you will find that the Confucianism approach to ecology, not just about spirituality, but also about the cosmology and also about the legal system. They have a clear legal system to forbid any illegal harm to the forest and to the pond, etc., etc., to preserve their lives so that it will achieve some sort of sustainable development. Yeah, they even install some government position to ensure the implementation of this environmental protection policy in ancient China. Yeah, but more than that, Confucianism also involved the cosmic dimension. It has a view of the universe, which assuming that, well, the basic character of the universe is change. Change means production or reproduction. Yeah, lives carry on. And the character of this heaven and earth exhibited, yeah, in terms of the virtue of benevolence. Yeah, you can see that virtue of benevolence in the production of lives and creativity, etc. Yeah, in the animal lives and tree life, etc., etc. And this is also the virtue of benevolence exhibit particularly in human being. That constitutes our human nature. And this human nature is part of so-called the greater nature, okay, yeah, shared. And this particular human nature is endowed by heaven, yeah. So our human nature is constituted by heaven's nature. Is there some sort of continuity in terms of virtue? The virtue of heaven is also the virtue of human being in terms of benevolence. And what is the role of human being in this cosmos is to serve as an assistant participating in heaven and earth's transformation and flourishment of lives. 参赞天地之化育, yeah, that is the human role as an assistant to heaven and earth. Okay, and then the Confucian approach, which is quite distinctive in the sense that it tried to chart a via media, the doctrine of mean, yeah, between two, according to Confucianism, yeah, the two extremes of anthropocentrism and ecocentrism. Yeah, so on the one hand, you will find that Confucius seems to care about human beings instead of the horses. But on the other hand, he also practiced some sort of practices, yeah, to catching fish with line instead of cable, yeah, all these practices. And he has some sort of, according to Mencius, some greater love, yeah, with sparing with things, benevolence towards the people, but attachment to one's parents. You have that kind of hierarchy, okay, greater love, yeah, but that greater love includes non-human beings into the web of love, according to Confucianism. And that is also an integrated approach. Integrated approach in the sense that it doesn't have a separated environmental ethics. The environmental ethics is incorporated into the whole system of aspects, which include one's filial piety towards parents, one's offering some sort of brotherhood with the brother and sister, etc., etc. So one of the sayings in the Li Ji is that the violation of the laws for the preservation of non-human life, such as cutting down a tree or killing an animal at the wrong time, is against filial piety, Xiao. So the Xiao become the virtue even behind the ecological practices. Yeah, you preserve the lives of the trees and the animal because of the same virtue of Xiao. You treat them as your brothers and sisters. If you hurt them, that means you are against your parent. Okay, yeah, that is the major idea. So the Confucian approach to non-human lives is integrated with the virtue of filial piety. So one may start from familial love and extend it to human beings and then extend to other forms of lives. Okay, yeah. One particular case we can see is Zhang. Yeah, he has a dynamic and harmonious view of the cosmos, with a basic concept of Qi, which permeated in all living beings, yeah, the Qi, yeah, the vital energy. Yeah, so it's quite similar to the idea about the spirit of the earth. Yeah, this is the same spirit permeated into all the corners of the earth, shared by all living beings. Okay, so all lives are constituted by the same Qi, and it is this force or energy uniting all lives as well as the whole universe. So, but this is not just a metaphysical entity or metaphysical so-called truth, yeah, or principle, but also it's a matter of spiritual cultivation, because according to Zhang, one should enlarge one's heart to embody all things under heaven. If you find that one thing is beyond your heart, you are not a sage. If you are a sage, you will find all things into your heart. You can embody them. You can feel their pain or whatever. And one of the famous saying is that the benevolent person forms one body with the myriad things of heaven and earth. 人者与天地万物成为一体. That means just one body, one community. Yeah. One of his saying in his famous Western inscription is that heaven is my father and earth is my mother. So I regard all living beings as my companions. Yeah, all people are my brothers and sisters. Okay, a universal brotherhood, and even extend this love, a companionship to all living creatures. Okay, and Zhang Zhai's, you can see that his approach is rooted in the virtue of filial piety, regarding heaven and earth as one's parent, fumu. And Zhu Xi followed that and say, well, heaven and earth has a great parent. But interestingly, this idea was adopted by the Chinese Catholic. So there's no confrontation or conflict between this idea and the Catholicism, that because during the Ming Dynasty, some Catholics began to use the term 大父母, great parent, to call God or Deus. Yeah? And some Catholics further interpret that the two famous commandments of love God and love thy neighbors in terms of honoring heaven, 敬天, as parent, and love all people, 爱人, as brothers and sisters. Yeah? That is the application of the filial piety, yeah, in the Chinese Catholicism. So I would like to say that there are certain similarities between Confucianism with Laudato Si. Yeah, we can find that Laudato Si starts with Saint Francis of Assisi's word, praise to you, my Lord, through our sisters, Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruits with colorful flowers and herbs, etc., etc. And basically, Confucius will say, yes, we also recognize other creatures as our fellow companion from the great parent, using the same metaphor, family, to think about our relationship with other creatures. Okay, and also it advocates some sort of integral or multidimensional approach, which including spirituality, policy, the physical dimension of environmental protection, and also the cultural and social aspect. And also the Confucianism will pay particular attention, especially in Zhang, to the weak and the poor of the community, and also advocating a wide media approach between anthropocentrism and ecocentrism, yeah, which you can find it in the Laudato Si. And also Laudato Si will affirm the cosmic role of human being, talking about yet God who wishes to work with us and who counts on our cooperation. We are called to be cooperator with God in the operation in the cosmos. Yeah, so Confucius will have similar thing to say that we are the assistant, yeah, to heaven and earth. Yeah, but fine to the final point, because I have a limited time. Yeah, I come back to the Chardin. Yeah, I think when we talk about the story of the universe, yeah, the Chardin has a very interesting view. I think, it's quite similar to some of those scholars working in the religion and science dialogue, talking about the emergentist point of view. Yeah, the universe starts with some very basic thing without life, and then we have life, and then human being. The evolution seems to have some sort of direction, and the direction is to increase complexity, life, etc. But he also interprets this process of hominization. That means human beings becoming perfect physically and then socially. Yeah, the socialization of humankind, overcoming of herd instinct by cultural convergence of humanity towards a single society, etc., etc., and also talking about through technology, urbanization, modern communication, we will establish more and more political, economic, and cultural links among different people. Yeah, it's a very, so say, optimistic vision. Yeah, but he also used quite Christian terms to talk about it. Yeah, the omega point, which is the converging towards a final unity, even use the term parousia, which is a very theological term, and also cosmic Christ. For him, cosmogenesis is also Christogenesis, is the birth of Christ. Yeah, so it's a very strong Christian theology behind his vision, and this vision includes some sort of cosmic salvation which affirm the metamorphosis of human being, yeah, through unity with Christ or God. Yeah, for Confucianism, it has similar idea that the benevolent person will form one body with the 10,000 myriad things of heaven and earth. Yeah, that means the spirituality, the perfect person, should be united with earth and everything in heaven and earth. Yeah, which is seems to be quite similar, but Confucius will make the query that why Jesus Christ? Yeah, well, perhaps that is one of the questions maybe the Zhang may have to answer to the Confucian challenger. Okay, but I think one more thing I think we need to think about, that is whether the role of human being played in that universe is that important. How important is the human role in the cosmos? Yeah, the Chardin seems to assume that it's a very important role. Yeah, I think Confucianism, we say yes, similarly, we have to affirm the role of human being. But I think Confucianism, sometimes you also have a reservation that, well, perhaps we should not exaggerate a little bit. Yeah, because when we talk about technology, of course, technology is something good, but it may also have some negative impact. Think about the ecological problem. Yeah, sometimes it may be caused also by technology. Yeah, and also the Chardin's work sometimes may be used by some scholar to advocate the idea of transhumanism. That means one day human being will become perfected through technology and some other things. But Confucianism will wonder whether that is true or not. I think as a Christian theologian, I also have reservation on that. Yeah, whether it will exaggerate or overstate the role or potential of human being in this cosmos. I think God can work out its own way through the Holy Spirit, through the renewal of the earth, with or without human being. One day, I remember the biblical text is that God can raise children of Abraham from stone. Yeah, that is the word from John the Baptist. Yeah, so I think we have to be more careful about whether we overstay the role of human being in this universe, especially when some scholars talk about the Anthropocene, this idea. It seems to imply that now we human beings take over as the Lord or the master of this earth. Yeah, the earth, the period of the earth can be divided according to the human role. I think that may be not humble enough. Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. So thanks for your coming, and thanks for the kind invitation from the Center for Catholic Studies, and especially for Dr. Lam and Professor Anthony, your interest in my research. And I'm deeply honored to respond to Professor Tucker and Professor Zhang, and together with Professor Lai. And so I graduated in 2023 from the Department of Culture and Religious Studies of Si-7April2025 under the supervision of Professor Lai and Chiu. So my doctoral dissertation explored the environmental ethics of Holmes Royston III through the lens of Confucianism and Christianity. So Professor Mary, you just told me that Holmes Royston just passed away in this February. So, it's also a lecture for Holmes Royston. Yeah. I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Lai, who guided through my academic journey and introduced me into the field of eco-theology and environmental ethics. And I'm also indebted to Professor Tucker and Professor Grimm. Your works and your publications inspired me during the completion of my doctoral thesis. So I quoted your works many times in my thesis. Here's my response. So as I mentioned, my thesis is about Holmes Royston, and Royston has said in his Chinese version of his environmental ethics in the preface of this book, if there's no Chinese environmental ethics, there will be no global environmental ethics, and thus no harmonious relationship between human beings and the earth. I have no doubt about it. This emphasizes on cultural diversity in ecological discourse resonated strongly with Laudato Si. For instance, in chapter 4, it's about integral ecology. This chapter highlights the interconnected dimensions of environmental, economic, and social ecology, and followed by cultural ecology. And Pope Francis just criticizes try to solve all the problems through technology. And he thinks that we should respect each local culture and try to solve the ecological crisis through by respecting different cultures. So, and here is the work from Professor Tucker and Professor Grimm. And in fact, Pope Francis' call to grant solutions of ecological crisis in local culture aligns with the religion, Professor Tucker and Professor Grimm's work. It's about, especially Professor Tucker, this book, Confucianism and Ecology, and Professor Grimm work about indigenous traditions and ecology. So, and many others, as we can see, many other religions, Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and because there's no much more space for Hinduism and some other religions. So to address, as we can see, to address ecological crisis, we must integrate scientific knowledge with transformed religions, cultures, theologies, and traditions. So my question is, if we turn to China, so how should we turn the Chinese Christian tradition to respond to the ecological crisis? So my theme is about the contextualizing ecological theology in mainland China, the history, the challenge, and the future directions. So in fact, it's based on one of my published paper in HTS Theological Studies. I just gave us an overview of the receptions of ecological theology in mainland China from 1990 to 1992. And I tried to understand the history by the lens of Stephen Bevan's contextual theology, the different models of contextual theology. So I divided the history of ecological theology in China into three phases. The first phase is initial phase. Professor An Ximeng, he published the first systematic analysis of Christian theology in China. It was published in 1990s. And in that time, the China reopened its gate to the world. They just want to learn about the Western culture, but Professor An just introduced the ecological theology in Western world, but he don't give a positive evaluation about Confucianism. He thinks that maybe Confucianism just the unity between heaven and human beings is too political, and it's not ecological. And but it's understandable because in Professor An's time, the people just think that everything about China is negative. They just want to learn from the West. So in 1994, I guess maybe Professor Tucker, you know this Professor Yang Tongjin in the Academy of China Social Science. Yeah. So he analyzed the Christian perspective on human beings, human nature relationships with in the background of China's market economy reforms. He argues that no matter what the Christian teaching about, if it's beneficial to the nature, then we think we should encourage the Western world to do their theology. So he's very practical. So it's understandable that he chose environmental ethics as a way to encourage ecological civilization. And so, because most Chinese people, they believe in science, not theology. So he chose environmental ethics. That's his way to do the environmental career. So in this phase, Chinese scholars just want to learn from the Western world. So they don't have their own consciousness about their cultures or their traditions. So I think that is still limited. And let's turn to the next phase. So the next phase is deepening phase. We have some familiar names here. For example, Thomas Berry, a PhD student from China Social Science Academy, Dr. Guo Suqi. His doctor's dissertation is about Thomas Berry, and especially about his critique of modernity's desacralization of nature. And another paper is from Pan Shaoduo. It was published in the journal of where I worked, the Journal of Logos and Pneuma, a journal of Chinese theology. And it's about Dr. Pan just evaluates the cosmological underpinnings of ecological thoughts in Laudato Si from Maximus' perspective. So it's a very interesting article. I read it a few days ago. Combine orthodoxy perspective with Catholic tradition. So, and it's very interesting that many Chinese scholars, they use ecological theology as a tool, academic tool to understand literature. So as we can see, Professor Liang Gong from Henan University, he just used the intellectuality as approach to link ecological theology with literature. And he also advocated for relative anthropocentrism that balances human agency with ecological symbiosis. So it's a little just like Professor Lai have showed us. It's similar to Confucian viewpoint about the nature. So, and this phase, they have greater theoretical sophistication, and the scholars just want to develop comparative frameworks and not just introduce, but also engage critically with ecological theology in the Western world. And the next phase is now. And as we can see, Professor Zhang Xintao, he interpreted Wheeler Cassell's All Pioneers through Rugen Moltmann's ecological theology. And Chen Lei, he analyzed Wendell Berry's poetry as a medium for ecological holism. And Moltmann's ecological theology has a great influence in mainland China, because you know Moltmann visited China for many times, and here in Hong Kong in 2019. So there's a doctoral thesis from Nankai University. Dr. Cai, he also employed Moltmann's theology to critique environmental dualism in William Faulkner's novels. And in this phase, we can see more synthetic approaches. For example, try to combine Christian theology with Chinese traditions, Confucian, Taoist, Buddhist, their view about the cosmological harmony and interdependence. So here's an evaluation. So I use the balance, the sixth model of contextual theology. I think that for church domain and academic domain, they should adopt a different model. For the church domain, first of all, the churches in mainland China, they should just introduce the Western theology and try to make it accessible to Chinese Christians. And I think that one of the key points is they should use the translated theory to transform their liturgical worship and try to incorporate natural elements and seasonal rhythms into worships. And I think that just like Professor Tucker mentioned that ecological conversion is very important and it should be combined to the believer's spiritual life. So, by this transformation, the Chinese church should do some environmental activities. They, for example, tree planting initiatives, clean up campaigns, and other things. So as for the academic domain in mainland China, and I think that I argue that the synthetic model is the optimal approach for Chinese ecological theology, because China has a very rich culture, and they should reinterpret, for example, Confucian concepts as ecological ethics. And Professor Lai just mentioned that in China's history, between the Chinese traditions and Christianity, there are some historical materials that should be used to construct the Chinese ecological theology. And we live in a global age, and we should also engage ecological maxims to address exploration of capitalism. And finally, we should also combine philosophy, science, and policy. But there are also challenges and barriers to contextualization of Chinese theology. First of all, the institutional gaps, because in mainland China, the university lack the theological faculties. Chongji College is very, divinity school is very special for the Chinese university. And most research just originates from scholars' personal interests. There's no organized power to push the construct of Chinese ecological theology. And the Chinese church, the second challenge is about the Chinese church. The traditional soteriologists, anthropocentrism, often neglect nature's role in divine grace. And it also creates conceptual barriers to holistic ecological theology. And we should also make our third ones about the cultural disconnects. And we, as Professor Tucker mentioned, we should use science to modernize our traditions. So, and the last one is about the political sensitives. When I have dinner with Professor Tucker, we also noticed that we should do it to align with national environmental policies. So what should we do? I think that maybe I just proposed that we should adopt some methodological innovation and try to do some theoretical construction. And for the practical things, maybe we need to cooperate with different forces to deal with the ecological crisis. So for the future of Chinese ecological, I think that a uniquely Chinese ecological theology must achieve three crucial integrations: cultural synthesis, merging traditional wisdom with modern frameworks, and theological dialogue reconciling Christian narratives with Chinese philosophy tradition, and global solidarity collaborating with diverse ecological movements to address the planetary crisis. So in the last part, I want to share one of my paper, which is about the dialogue between Confucianism and Holmes Royston. And I also point the significance for theology in planetary climate crisis. I just use the results from the dialogue, try to deal with the limitations of Christian theology. For example, the dualistic about body and mind, and the salvation problem, and try to point the implications of the theology in the planetary climate crisis. And one of my point is we should transform Confucianism, because Chardin, his interpretation of the direction of natural history, I mean the history of evolution, he thinks that if we adopt Chardin's point, we should define the direction of virtue of life and growth, 生生之德, as balanced with biodiversity and the complexity of life. And as a result, then Confucianism will naturally support the protection of biodiversity and its three dimensions: genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. Similarly, Confucianism will also affirm the basic demands of humans who are at the pinnacle of life's complexity, and the affirmation of a unique human position aligns with Confucian tradition. Furthermore, Confucianism would support the preservation of nature's ability to generate complexity and diversity. Confucianism, which emphasizes human responsibility, as Professor Lai mentioned. So Confucianism would have a stronger motivation to promote rescue and healing work in nature. Because, Confucian tradition, they just focus on the responsibility of human beings. So in closing, I want to reflect on Thomas Barry's emphasis on story as a source of meaning. So I would like to share a personal experience. So during the Qingming festival, my family and I retreated to Changzhou Island. While preparing my response to Professor Tucker and Graham's lectures, I stayed in a room overlooking the whole South China Sea. And the waves crashed against the rocks, and the bird song filled the spring air. When my family left for the pier, I found myself alone with the nature. Suddenly, the tramping of modernity faded away. So I realized my reading of Thomas Barry Teilhard and also about the nature, no longer just an academic task, my job. It's also, I realized that my immersion in nature became sacred, intrinsic acts of connection with nature and sacred souls. So as we can see, Teilhard was once described as unique for his ability to listen deeply to culture, to silence, to the margins, to the deepest of traditions. In the same way, when we quiet external noise and listen intently to ourselves, to nature, to the deepest yearning of human beings, we may hear a voice that modernity cannot offer, a voice about a multi-dimensional sound of life's meaning, a prelude where old stories refresh and new stories begin. Just like this picture showed, Jesus Christ, he died for not just for human beings, but for the whole universe. And his glory will reflect in the whole universe. This is my sharing. Thanks.
And Professor Tucker, Professor Graham, would you like to give a response to Professor Lai and Zhang, or you want to have full discussion?
Well, just very briefly, because I'd love to hear.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I would like to thank the respondents for their thoughtful remarks and prepared remarks. And Mary Evelyn has said she is more interested in hearing your remarks. So I am very taken by bringing the critical questions regarding Teilhard's thought. And Professor Lai mentions his anthropocentric, his focus on the human, and also Teilhard's colonialist perspective. The reading of indigenous peoples, of Asian societies as not as evolved as Western societies and so forth. I would add a third. Teilhard spent a fair amount of time talking about eugenics. Each one of these topics is it would be a lecture in itself. But I think I can make one quick response. Teilhard's commitment to Christian love, he found in each one of these, it moved him not through them. He was bogged down, I think, in his anthropocentrism, but he also said human may not respond adequately. Human may be left behind. So he was also critical of the human. His colonialist, I don't think Teilhard moved past that entirely, but love, I think, moved him into other considerations than simply reading other people as inferior. The third, the eugenics issue. There is a beautiful book, The Evolution of Beauty by Rick Prum, in which he makes the comment at the end of the book, there is no scientist in the 20th century who did not wrestle with eugenics. And I think this is very important in considering Teilhard. Teilhard came very clearly to an understanding that eugenics position some people as lower, as inferior, and not worthy of love. He rejected it. So Teilhard came to a very clear idea, and these are such important considerations rather than just seeing Teilhard's optimism and positive.
So just to follow that, but first to thank both of you for wonderful lectures in themselves, actually.
Yeah.
And I was very grateful that you brought out the point that John's just mentioned, that Teilhard's understanding of Chinese traditional culture was extremely limited. And he was a scientist who's actually quite well respected even now among the science community in Beijing and elsewhere, and known for being part of the Peking Man discovery. So that's in itself quite remarkable, actually. But I think the limitation, then we'll add it to our next, the PowerPoint needs that in there, because the limitation reflects a number of things, but especially this condescending opinion about other religions, that other religions are just insufficient to Christianity. So the superiority, the one truth through Christian or Catholic ways forward. So I really appreciate that. And Du Ming says all the time, well, Teilhard was wonderful, but he didn't understand, Confucianism, etc. So thank you for that. And I think, what you are doing is exceedingly important in terms of trying to put together something of Christian eco-theology and help us understand where that has come from and where it's going in China. Very, very important. And also to make these links with Confucianism. Because again, I think frankly, most eco-theologians know nothing about Confucianism. And this is part of the problem of where we are right now. So I think what's happening here at Chinese University of Hong Kong is exceedingly important. And both of your deep understanding for many years of Confucianism is invaluable. And I'll just leave it at that. But really congratulations to both of you and thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tucker and Professor Grimm. Now, floor is open. Any audience would ask question or you give your comment. Not quite good.
Mackie, you're allowed to ask a question too.
Right, I have lots of questions to bring on my list, but yeah, let me see if any one of you have any questions. But maybe I will begin. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the lectures. So I have a really weird question to ask. So I think we're built like, or made by the image of God, right? The image of the. Does that, if we care about like the environment or the nature, does that actually help us to kind of like rebuild a connection with God, like to the profession of like Edenic imagery, like the way I'm thinking in a very theological way too. Yeah, it's slightly more abstract.
That's a very fine question. The image of the divine, the image of God in Teilhard's thought is, I would respond to raise the question of Teilhard's anthropology, his theology, and his cosmology. Teilhard's anthropology, it's the view of the human. In Teilhard's time, and I think it continues even to this day, the human with our rational consciousness we are not seen in the mainstream of evolution. We are some eddy or some very unusual, like the Sistine Chapel, where God is reaching over to touch Adam. That sense of the divine touch of the human makes us totally unusual. That for Teilhard was totally unacceptable. If humans have consciousness, it's in evolution itself. So Teilhard speaks about consciousness from the beginning. His theology then, it's an overly long topic, but obviously his sense of the divine, of God, is in that evolutionary flow, and it's also in consciousness. So human consciousness is not the only form of consciousness, and the image of divine is, human consciousness reflects it, but doesn't contain it, and then finally cosmology, and I use the term cosmogenesis, it's ongoing. So the sense of the divine, not something transcendent, but in the flow, and yet there is a transcendent dynamic in time. With Teilhard, it's future drawn. So this is a very complex question, but Teilhard, I think in his anthropology, theology, and cosmology wrestles with your question.
Thank you.
Yes, it's very complex, and of course, I think we should have responses from our respondents. So I think many of these, I'll be very frank, I think many of these theological ideas from Christianity and from other traditions, we need to retrieve, reevaluate, and reconstruct these traditions for modern purposes. And my sense, not definitive, but imago Dei is one important aspect of the dignity of the human, and so on. But it doesn't incorporate or include evolution per se, unless it is reevaluated within the sense of a cosmic Christ of the universe or a cosmic sensibility. So if it's just human-divine relations and human-human relations, which are anthropocentric, and human-earth relations are left out, it's insufficient to describe who we are at this moment. And the exciting thing is, and for the next generation, the exciting thing is, this is vaster than our theologies are able to contain. And that's why the work that's happening here is really important. I'd love to have both of you respond to this question.
Perhaps I may respond briefly. Number one, before we talk about human being made after the image and likeness of God, we have to talk about it was made from earth, from dust first. Yeah. So we cannot abstract our existence from earth and dust, and one day we will return to earth and dust. Okay, yeah. Remember the couplet from the Catholic symmetry. Yeah. 塵歸塵，土歸土. Yeah. on from dust to earth to earth. Yeah? And number two, talk about the image of God. Remember that we are only made after the image and likeness of God. The true image of God referring to Jesus Christ. He is the real image of God. And when we talk about Jesus Christ as the real image of God, we talk about He emptied Himself. In chapter 2 of the Philippians, He emptied Himself. That is the true image of God. It's not something to be grasped, but you have to be sort of shown through one's obedience and service, humility, etc., and love, and creating that kind of loving community of the church and so on and so forth. Of course, eventually it has to be a cosmic Christ, mentioned by the Chardin and some others. That is the true image of God.
So I will follow Professor Lai's comments. So I guess maybe some visitors belong to the evangelical tradition, and we will turn to the Bible. Because in John, the Gospel of John, Professor Lai just said, no one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is Himself God, and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made Him known. And in Philippians chapter 2, verse 5 to 8, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to His own advantage. Rather, He made Himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. So I think that if we can make it applied to the ecological crisis, we should sacrifice our desires, our own, what we should have, our rights, for the benefits of the ecosystem. So that's my answer.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the floor? Well, if not, I will use the time to ask questions then.
Take advantage.
So I would like to ask about, especially in the final words there in your PowerPoint about ecological conversion. What do you think about ecological conversions, and how this notion that perhaps John Paul II and Pope Francis advocate help us to understand the idea of Thomas Berry's, entering into a new, story, or even Teilhard de Chardin's idea of going to Omega Point. So how do you think, how this notion of ecological conversions help us to understand these two words and process?
My response, Mark, would be Thomas Berry's phrase, the universe is not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. So I feel that the realization from the toes up, the whole embodiment then of that realization constitutes conversion, a turning of a remarkably mind-heart dimension rather than simply an intellectual realization. The turning, the depth of the turning that Thomas Berry groped in his own reflection on himself when he was flying over the Nile River back from the conference in the Seychelles, he came to a realization as he looked at the Nile, what am I doing? What is my work? And he felt the earth saying to him that he was a logos, the meaning of the earth was speaking to him. And he said, geologian, that's my life work. I'm a geologian. It was an ecological conversion moment for Thomas Berry, a turning in his thinking. And that turning brought him then to formulate the term ecozoic, a period of time. So you can see Thomas was very committed to the geological periodization of the earth. Thomas had that historical sense of periodizing, but ecological era was a point at which the human would recover our voice in league with the voices of the earth community. The subjectivity,
the communion of voices of the earth. I still find that a very profound challenge, and turning to hear the voices of the earth and our human voice among those voices.
There's so much behind your question, I feel, so I can only see and answer a very small slice of it. But Thomas Berry was inviting us over and over again to ecological conversion and to who we are as humans. And he said we have to reinvent the human at the species level with shared dream experience. That's huge. That's amazing. That's what we're doing right now. With all of the disruptions around the planet, it's very hard to sustain a Teilhardian hope in the midst of this. But I think the call in the Encyclical, too, is very profound for conversion. It's one of the highlights for me. And I'll just say in a personal way, when I came back from Japan with great disillusionment over the US and the 60s, the Vietnam War, the civil rights, things that are still, just horrendous, to be honest. What an imperfect society with great aspirations. So when I came to Asia, and I began to feel and sense some of this thing of this unity in overcoming some of the dualisms of Chi, of matter energy, of Shin, mind, heart, and so on. And the sense of the livingness of the earth and the sentience of plants and animals and things that we felt yesterday, and the invitation that is there deeply in these cultures, even with this massive modernization, which is impressive on the surface, but there's something, I think, still here in East Asia, especially in all of East Asia. And when I came back, and with all this disillusionment, and I met Thomas Berry, this was a moment of ecological conversion, because I could see and sense in him, sitting there against the Hudson River with the Palisades, these millions of year stones behind him across it. This was a person, a cosmic person, but who profoundly understood our suffering of the moment, these ecological challenges, and what we're called to. And over and over again, I think each one of you can probably say, what is your ecological conversion moment? That's what we have to keep telling one another and sharing those moments.
And Professor Haoran, your story at the end is
So I just have some inspiration from Thomas Berry, and I think that the modernity, the old stories, is about the modernity. It's about the let's make the paradise, let's make the Eden without God, without sacredness. And the new story should be let's live harmony with nature, with humble heart and reverence heart, and that will be the goal itself, not the economic growth, the growth of Nasdaq index. And it's not a good for Monday today, because the global capital economy just down. So I think that we should focus on our quality of life, not just about economic. That will be the start of a new story, and nature will be the role for the story. Yeah.
I add a comment here. I think when we call for ecological conversion, that means we are aware that there are something wrong. Yeah, everything is wrong in this house. Okay, that is a slogan in one of the popular movie in Hong Kong. Okay, yeah. We assume that there will be something wrong there. I start my study of ecological theology with John Cobb. Yeah, he changed basically everything in his theology because of the awareness of ecology. From the task of theology is not about how to describe the world, but how to change the world. And he also think about what is our view of life, whether it's a very individualistic understanding of life or an ecological understanding of life. Even the whole economic system, we need to be rethink. Yeah, because now our economic system aims at the growth of GDP, but that GDP is just an abstract number. It doesn't reflect the quality of life. You can have wealth, your house you live in can increase the market value by 50% per year, but you are living in the same house with the same quality or even worse quality. Okay, what do you want? Wealth or health? And also, of course, we need to think about our understanding of God, Christ, etc., etc. Yeah, but I think at the bottom of the problem is that it's an urgent problem. Yeah, so the repentance. Yeah, conversion means you find something wrong and then you repent and change the direction of your life, your lifestyle, orientation, etc., etc. But it comes back to the biblical verse I quote at the end. Yeah, God can raise children of Abraham from stone. That is from the word of John the Baptist. It's a calling for repentance. Don't think about Abraham as your ancestor. If you don't repent, you will perish. Okay, I think that is the warning of the biblical message to our present human society. Think about the story of the universe. Yeah, in the story of the earth experienced several times of massive extinction of lives. Well, I can't remember 5 times, 6 times, or 7 times.
Yeah,
5.
We are in the 6th.
Yeah, we are in the 6th.
Yeah.
So it is possible that we experience the 6th one. Okay, but the life of the earth still can renew the life and bring back life to the earth every time. Yeah. So God will not fail. We will fail. We will perish. God will bring back life perhaps to the earth after the extinction of Homo sapiens. We will become another kind of dinosaur.
Thank you. And we still have 7 minutes to go. Take these opportunities, precious opportunities of exchanging ideas with Professor Tucker, Professor
We have
Graham.
an expert in ecological theology sitting there.
Not only comments, just share your feelings, your experience, your internal response to the talk.
Sure.
Josephine.
Can share. First of all, thank you very much. I used to study in Sacred Heart Canosian College. So the image of Jesus holding the Sacred Heart touched me for quite a while. I actually just want to make an invitation. Since we're talking about ecological conversion, perhaps all of you, if you're interested or you have the time, just come to Kaduri Farm and Botanic Garden, spend half a day along the river, see the butterflies, appreciate the flowers. I think you will see the animate world and in touch with God again. So I think there's so much in today's lecture and also a lot of exchanges. I really need to digest some more. And I'll go back to my 6 spots, which I do every day, near in the forest or a near forest that we have there. So there are lots of transformative moments for myself, to be with myself, to maybe dissolve my ego a little bit. So that's my invitation. Just I can leave the contact to Professor Lee. If you're interested, just send me an email. You're all welcome to visit the farm.
Here in the back.
Wow. So, really the back, the last one.
Well, thanks very much for the talks. Well, there is just one question kind of about the eschatology of it. So if we develop this ecological consciousness and take care of the earth and so on, is there any sense in Laudato Si or Teilhard de Chardin or Thomas Barry, any sense of how we are, preparing for the end of time? Is it a case of making the bed that ultimately we will live in? How are we to understand the linkage between our present efforts in this direction, and the end of time, the kingdom of heaven?
There are people who use the word prophet when they talk about Thomas Berry. I'm not sure if Teilhard is described in quite the same way, but Thomas Berry is often given the term because he uses rather stark and, if I may, brutal language in describing the assault upon the earth by our industrial form of life. And people use the word prophetic to describe that, and it has that sense of the end times, or the end of time. And Berry was himself moved by those considerations too. He felt that it was also inevitable. And by the 90s, when he and Brian Swim wrote Universe Story, there was, before the book was published, there was a gathering of about 30 people informed about environmental issues and also cultural issues. They gathered in California to discuss the book. After it, Thomas Berry said he had a conversion, again, a moment. He said, my spirit of hope is renewed. A community of like-minded people who spoke about the work that was being done. I experience work being done now by humans around the planet. There is some real turning going on, and it's local, and we don't hear about it in our major news reporting. But it is in relationship to your use of the word end times also. I think people feel there is something coming to a close, and there's an urgency that's calling us to something new.
Yeah, we could say a lot, and thank you for that question. John Haught has written a lot on Teilhard and eschatology, so I recommend it's H-A-U-G-H-T. He's a brilliant theologian and one of the best scholars on Teilhard. And he's saying something's calling us forward, as John was just saying as well. But I want to maybe pick up what John was saying, and also Josephine, in that with this breakdown, many people are saying there's a breakthrough, to a new consciousness and conscience. And I think that's definitely happening because the suffering is just overwhelming. The eco-anxiety is just off the charts, not only with our students, but people of every generation. And I just wanted to mention, as maybe a little point of hopefulness, we've been coming to China actually I've been coming since '85, and I've seen incredible changes here. And this is, I think, one of the most exciting places on the planet for all kinds of reasons. And it's not impossible to take the largest country in the world and start to make some of these changes. But this is why I think the Kadoorie farm and botanical garden is so important. Because not only is it a beautiful place ecologically, but the educational programs that are being done there for children and for adults and so on is outstanding. And we're going to really, hopefully, reflect that back to people in the West and so on. But especially because the one little sign there the other day is, are plants conscious? Now, this is a question that 6 to 10 years ago, people wouldn't even be asking, right? That's weird. That's not science. This is a critical question. And I said very briefly, we have many websites. We put a lot of effort into getting this information out on a website, but I think one of the most important is what we're doing right now. We had several graduate students do research when we came to China last summer, and they were back home working on what is the literature of the sentience of the world, of the consciousness of plants, of trees, and so on, to say nothing of the sentience of animals, migration patterns, turtles and salmon and caribou and so on. This is a conscious living planet, and that has been wiped away by an objective imperialist method of science that has objectified everything. So the coming back, you can't imagine the conferences. We're going to one in Harvard in a few weeks, all about consciousness of planets. We were at NYU, 250 people there from all over North America on this issue. It is one of the hottest and most important topics because it brings back what the children see and understand. And if we can recapture that profound sense of awe and wonder and connection, I think the hope is there. So Kadori Botanical Gardens, big shout out for what they're doing. It's fantastic.
Perhaps I will make a comment on the so-called eschatological message. Yeah, it seems to me that eschatology literally means the last things, but actually I think it expresses our hope. I think that is very important. Yeah, in face of the ecological crisis, number one, we cannot go to either the extreme, either we are too naive or too optimistic, or we are too pessimistic. Yeah, have that kind of faith or anxiety or whatever. And I think if we take it this way, I think we think about what kind of hope we should look for. Yeah, perhaps it's not the sudden coming of the new heaven and new earth, but the spirits keep on renewing or restoration of life to this earth. I think that is a more realistic hope, which is neither too pessimistic or optimistic, and that may help encourage our ecological practices.
I think that the eschatology has a hidden dualism, especially about the material and the soul. And actually, it was influenced by the Greek tradition, Plato, and it just separated the material world and the spiritual world. And but if we read, and in the Chinese church tradition, some people they argue that maybe God will destroy everything and build a new heaven and earth. But if we look the Bible carefully, for example, the book of Revelation, the new heaven and the new earth will come to the earth, and the God will live together with his people and on the earth. So I think that it's not a broken eschatology. It's just a renewed relationship with the world. Yeah.
Thank you both for that. And what I meant to say in my enthusiasm about, you keep saying the renewal of the earth and so on, is this Living Earth Community is a website that we've been developing over many months with a whole number of people working. And what's exciting is this is animal behavior. This is scientists, talking about the consciousness of the octopus and so on and so forth. So it's science coming together with nature writers. The largest websites we have had at Yale are ones that I have hosted with nature writers, most famous nature like Robin Kimmerer and so on. We've had 4,000 people listening to these webinars from all over. And 4,000, 2,000, 3,000, the largest of any webinars at Yale is about this topic. So this website will bring together the science, the nature writers, and many, many others who are working on this. And I think it's very exciting along these lines of renewing the face of the
earth. I want to share my own experience of, you may call it an ecological conversion. I still remember when I read Teilhard's work and Matter-Spirit Union. I can't imagine that there is any spirit in a stone. How can you tell it's just an object, right? But I say, well, maybe Teilhard has his own reason. So I started to try, and then walk across a park, every morning, before going to work. And then I started some years ago. I started to talk to a tree. And I contemplated this tree and try to talk to him or her, and how's it going, and how come he's here, and it may be out of my own imagination, but once, twice, third times, and I began to build up a relationship. It seems that he's living. He is a plant, and even I learned from my friend that I can listen, hear his breath. I tell you it's true. Yeah, Josephine agrees. Yeah, and then I found, wow, a tree, of course, is a living thing. And then I started, even I stand on the ground, and I'm grateful. He supports me for a long time. And I am in their home, my own home. And it's a kind of paradigm shift. And I think it's and I call it ecological conversion. And then I started to have a new way of seeing things. And I felt an intimate relationship. As Prof. Francis mentioned in the Laudato Si, we have to develop a fraternal relationship with all creatures. Yeah. And it is my own little experience of conversion. And I always, bear in mind, people criticize Teilhard de Chardin that he underestimate or neglect the problem of evil or the sin. Is quite optimistic. Yeah, it's true. Even when we look around today, a lot of call it bad guys, bad things. Even when we want to change the capitalist economic system, which only promote or encourage our consuming behavior, and try to destroy or make use of our nature as just resources for our satisfaction. And yeah, it's true. But when I look around, when I share with Professor Tucker and their efforts to build up different websites, resources, and one thing I think is very important, our friendship, a fraternal relationship among us, even a small group. And this evening, I'm so happy, I'm glad that you come. We are one. You're in it. I count it. And don't neglect, just small good things. You come because you care about our Mother Earth, our universe. And even if we have this small or spark of goodwill, God will take care. And that's why I think, I agree with Professor Lai that where does our hope lies on? Of course, this year is Jubilee year. Yeah, we have to be a pilgrim of hope. I think it's very important, and I appreciate and benefit from the insight, the vision of Teilhard de Chardin and Thomas Berry, and also I accepted the call of Pope Francis, to care about for our common home. It's urgent. Some strong states, withdraw from the Paris Agreement or something, but we can do something. Yeah, we can do something. I appreciate, and this afternoon I talked to Professor Tucker, and she said, I hope our evening gathering would not be just like a serious academic talks or lectures. I said, no, I don't expect that. I hope it is an event that all people with goodwill to care for our common home join together to share, to support each other, and so we can walk along this journey of the universe and hopefully we can approach the Omega point.
Thank you for your comments.